Today's talk is titled The Thread, to be delivered by Michael Eselun. Michael Eselun serves as the chaplain for the Sims-Mann UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology. Two-time TEDx speaker, Michael speaks extensively to healthcare professionals, patient populations, and faith communities across the country. Long serving as adjunct faculty at the Wiesenthal Center Museum of Tolerance, he's also worked as an activist educator addressing anti-LGBTQ bias in the larger community for well over 30 years. Michael was recently inducted into the UCLA Semel Institute Eudaimonia Society in recognition of having lived a meaning-driven life. He has, he has 4 volumes of CDs available for purchase. Contact Michael through his website, michaeleselun.com. Michael.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As an oncology chaplain, often when I'm getting acquainted with a patient for the first time, I will often ask, tell me, what's a perfect day look like for you? Before you got diagnosed, before you got sick, you don't have to work, you're feeling pretty great. What would that day be for you? My intention is to find out in a quick and easy way where they find their juice in life. What is it that gives their life meaning? What floats their boat? And it can often be a telling answer. Although sometimes I admit I do sit in a little bit of judgment when someone fumbles and hesitates. Oh, I don't know, watching TV, I guess. Carl had no trouble at all, newly diagnosed with lung cancer, identifying what his thread would be. Oh, watching my son play soccer and then taking him out for an ice cream. That answer reveals so much, doesn't it? A few years ago, I had a patient, Kelly, who gave me a Christmas gift. It was a teeny spool of thread wrapped up in a poem written by William Stafford called The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It runs among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and grow old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Such a stunning and succinct summation, isn't it? And what a tender, touching gift to receive. Carl had no trouble at all identifying his thread. Would you? The older I get and the more my life unfolds, I find myself wondering if it's really as simple as all that. Is it as clean as all that? Is that thread really unchanging? Is it really unbreakable? I thought I had a good grip on it, but then divorce happened, or cancer, or dementia, or betrayal, bankruptcy. The career that seemed to define who I was just disappeared. Do I have to find a new thread now or redefine the old one? Or am I simply to surrender to my faith in the idea that the damn thread exists in the first place? If the thread does exist, and I like to believe that it does, it can be an arduous process of drilling down to define it, a process of distillation that I find can take years, if not decades, drilling down to essence, spiritual essence, if you will. That particular challenge confronts so many on the cancer journey. If I can no longer be, do, or have what I once was, who would I even be then? Do I even exist? If I'm no longer the super mom who never misses a soccer game or a birthday party, do I even exist? Am I still the mom? And yet, while I do have a good grip on the thread, it can serve as a kind of guy wire, stabilizing me in stormy times. But I also wonder if it might be conceptualized not just as a thread to run through my life or beneath it, but what about a thread to wrap around my life, to hold it together, to give it some coherence, to find a place for all the disparate pieces of my puzzle, a puzzle that might have to be arranged and rearranged again and again because life demands it. My sister, Terry, was a pioneer in women's surfing in the 60s and 70s. She competed at the national level. She was the co-producer and co-director of the first professional women's surfing championship in Malibu in 1975. She's in her mid-70s now, and she still loves to surf, though it grieves her, as you might imagine, that she can't do all the things she once could, or certainly not as well. A few years back, she bumped into an old surfing buddy from back in the day at the beach, and they were bemoaning this particular state of affairs, and he said, "Tara, you know what I came to realize? It was always about getting wet." I love that. I thought it was about thrills or competition or winning, but maybe it was all just about getting wet. Distillation. As an old former professional dancer, I confront the very same challenge every Saturday afternoon in dance class, coming face to face with the limitations of a body that won't let me do what it once did. And yet, as I struggle with those limitations, I did come to a different conceptualization of them a number of years ago. I have never seen a dance performance that knocked me in the gut with more power and intensity than seeing Donna McKechnie in the original Broadway production of A Chorus Line in New York City in 1976. That was some kind of heady transformational experience for this 21-year-old dancer from Los Angeles on his first trip to New York. A number of years ago, Donna performed at an AIDS benefit here in Los Angeles. She was maybe in her 60s at the time. She put on quite a bit of weight. She was wearing a big flowing caftan-like dress. She offered a highly truncated version of her tour de force from A Chorus Line, The Music and the Mirror. Oh, there were echoes of the original choreography here and there, hitting a line, an arm gesture, the flick of a head. I sat in my seat and just sobbed, not out of sadness for what was lost or what was missing, but crying at the unmistakable beauty of essence, her essence, an essence that might have even been obscured, camouflaged once upon a time by her youth and agility. In some ways, that performance was more beautiful, more impactful than had she been soaring across the stage of the Schubert Theater in that red dress in front of a bank of mirrors. Distillation. I'd been told that Keith had been a brilliant architect, but when I met him, long after his glioblastoma diagnosis, all that brilliance had been wiped away. That brain tumor robbed him of the ability to compose a coherent sentence or find the appropriate word for anything. Still, he loved to see me, and so every week we would spend an hour together. There wasn't much of a conversation, but there was one sentence he used quite often: "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." As if his whole life had been distilled down to this sense of apology for not being who he once was, for not being able to communicate. I finally had to lay down the law. "Keith, one rule in here: no, I'm sorry, no more. You certainly don't have to apologize to me. This hour can be spent any way you like. We can just sit in silence for an hour. We can look at each other. We can take hands. We can meditate. We can cry. We can pray. But no, I'm sorry. I want this to be one place where you do not have to feel like you're letting anybody down. Certainly not me." It's kind of crazy. I didn't get to know him in the context of his brilliance, and yet I kind of fell in love with the guy, with the simplicity of his spirit, his tender heart, his kindness, his vulnerability, his humility. Distillation. Last October, I got to take a wonderful 2-week solo trip to Turkey. And there I got a vivid reminder of something I've long known to be true. There's the thing, and there's our experience of the thing, and they're not the same thing. They're not always congruent. They don't always line up. Anyone will tell you one of the primo sights to see in all of Turkey is the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and it is indeed staggering, stunningly beautiful. But on that particular Sunday morning, waiting through an impossibly long line to get through security, and then navigating through the hordes of visitors once I was inside, the experience of the place did not begin to match the majesty, the grandeur of the architecture. By contrast, I had a far more meaningful, potent, even tearful experience visiting this far more modest 13th century wooden mosque called Eşrefoglu in a teeny village called Beyşehir. The experience of the thing is different from the thing itself. For over 20 years, well over 20 years, I served as co-founder and co-chair of GLIDE, Gays and Lesbians Initiating Dialogue for Equality. We were a nonprofit, all-volunteer, anti-homophobia speakers bureau. In those 20 plus years, I trained dozens and dozens and dozens of volunteer speakers. Each speaker had to craft their own coming out story to share as part of the engagement. I would always encourage them to share your experience, not your story. Your story is just the facts. I came out to my mom when I was 16. Your experience, on the other hand, might sound like, for me, coming out to my mom was the big one. I stood the most to lose there if my mom rejected me, and I knew I could never take it back. I was so scared. Sharing the experience of our life's journey with some kind of vulnerability and authenticity, I believe, is the only pathway we have to make meaningful connections with life around us. Perhaps pursuing that through line of experience through our life story might lead us to our thread. But the thing is, that thread might also come up for interpretation and reinterpretation again and again over the course of a lifetime. It's worth remembering that it's within our creative power to do so. Esther had been a brilliant woman, a professor, a scholar, a curator. She had the most luminous spirit, an art historian. Her spirit was so luminous that on the first day I met her, on the first day of chemotherapy, after having been recently diagnosed with ovarian cancer, I was so captivated by her passion, I was ready to quit my job then and there just to go back to school to study German Expressionism under Esther. Her passion was that infectious. After decades of scholarship, research, teaching, she was offered the dream of a lifetime come true. She was invited to curate a major retrospective of the German Expressionist painter Max Beckmann at a world-class museum. She worked her whole life for this. But these things must be planned years in advance. Could she say yes, given her diagnosis and this treatment regimen and her prognosis? She wrestled with all the questions, as you might imagine. But Michael, don't you think maybe I ought to say yes, and that commitment might be the affirmation my spirit needs to heal? What do you think? Sadly, her medical reality demanded that she decline the offer. As we wandered through the rubble of her disappointment and her grief, we looked at essence again. What was the essence of her gift? Could it ever really be lost? And could it only be expressed through this high-profile exhibit, through this kind of recognition? Or was her essence really maybe her capacity to give inspiration, to give breath to countless students, to me? One graduate student changed her whole field, her whole course of study after taking one class with Esther. What if that capacity to inspire was the thread that could wrap around her life, her version of getting wet? What if it could wrap around a life as tragic as the ending was, but a life not without meaning? A few years ago, I came upon an essay in the Atlantic in which the writer drew a distinction between obituary virtues and eulogy virtues. Obituaries often read like a resume, just the facts, boxes checked. He was born here, went to school there, married this person, worked at this company, got these awards, and then he died. The eulogy, on the other hand, often reveals a whole other multidimensional view of who a person was. He was the guy who always made me laugh. He was the kind of a friend who just showed up without being asked to help you move or to paint your den. What do you suppose it would look like if we recalibrated our lives to focus on the pursuit of eulogy virtues rather than obituary virtues? What would that be for you? Through one lens, the obituary might be the story of our life, just the facts. The eulogy reveals perhaps our response to the story. How did we translate it into a life in a way that we could intersect and interact with life around us? Perhaps pursuing those eulogy virtues might not only lead us to the thread, but might lead us to the way we can wrap that thread around our story and find that coherence for which we have been looking. You know how some people, myself included, God knows, will post on social media a picture of a beloved cat or dog, asking for prayers and good thoughts while their beloved animal friend faces some life-threatening challenge. Your heart breaks for them. And then in a few days, perhaps, there are more pictures as our friend expresses their sorrow over having had to say goodbye. You can taste their tears. You remember when it was your time to face that awful ordeal, or maybe you sit in dread knowing what's coming down the pike for you and your furry friend. And then sometimes, in very little time at all, there's another picture, or 12, of the most adorable little kitten or puppy. Meet Oscar, everybody. I'm so in love. I sometimes wonder if the specificity of that little puppy or kitten matters at all. What really matters is that there's this need, there's this capacity in my heart to give love. And this is the little guy who showed up, so we're just going to love each other forever. And that's that. I don't mean to denigrate the uniqueness of any of our furry companions, God knows. But what I'm talking about is perhaps a bigger love that's bigger than our love for our old cat or old dog or this little kitten or this sweet little puppy. It's maybe bigger than all of us. That bigger love, that capacity might be what's at the very end of all of our threads, a place that is beyond our ideas about success and failure or what a good life looks like. The sweet, uncomplicated, uncompromising love I felt from my Grandma Ann, my mom's mom, certainly points toward my thread if it isn't the thread itself. She's been dead for nearly 35 years. And yet her voice is the one I hear so vividly in my head, I carry it in my heart. She lived a hard life. Large Italian family, 10 kids, abusive father who used to beat her regularly. After one such beating, she had had enough, and she ran away into the arms of a young man who had become my grandfather for no other reason than he was there. If she hadn't been beaten that afternoon, I wouldn't be here. Sadly, that marriage didn't last very long. But my grandmother never stopped looking for love, and she never stopped giving it away in abundance, with limitlessness to her kids, to her grandkids, to her friends. My mom and I used to reminisce sometimes about how when you'd share with Grandma some loss or disappointment that you had endured, that the most she would offer would be, keep your chin up, dearie. It wasn't nearly as flip as it sounds. It was said with so much tenderness and compassion, and actually said with an unspoken kind of wisdom that would say, I know there's nothing I can do or say to make this any better, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending there is and say it. I only want you to know that I know you got to go on. And I love you so much. And I don't want you to hurt. I just want you to be happy. So the best I've got is keep your chin up, dearie. That, I think, taps into the bigger love. Sometimes a patient will ask me for a prayer, and I will often include this. May we keep our hearts and eyes open to recognize blessings that we don't know we're looking for. May that be so. I don't know, though. We can hope. In the meanwhile, keep your chin up, dearie. So be it.
Thank you.